You've just watched your fourth promotion in 6 years go to someone else. A man who joined the company 18 months after you did, and you're standing in the elevator of Kestrel Dunmore Financial Group with your reflection staring back at you in the polished brass doors, wondering, not for the first time, whether the problem has always been you. Your name is Philippa Ashworth, 39 years old, and you have spent the last decade building the risk analysis division at Kestrel Dunmore into something the rest of the industry actually pays attention to now. You designed the predictive modeling system that saved the firm from catastrophic losses during 2 separate market downturns. You trained half the analysts, currently working 3 floors above the cubicle you still occupy. And 4 times now, when the director position you've earned came open, it went instead to someone with a fraction of your track record, and you've slowly come to realize a much thicker set of connections to the partners who make these decisions behind closed doors. The man who got the job this time is named Tobias Renfrew, a competent enough analyst, but nowhere near the caliber you've demonstrated year after year. And when you congratulate him in the break room with a smile that costs you more than he'll ever know, he actually has the nerve to thank you for showing him the ropes these past few months, completely oblivious to the fact that you're the reason his numbers looked good enough to get promoted over you in the first place. If you've ever poured everything you had into work that kept rewarding everyone except you, I want you to stay with me, because what happens to Philippa over the next 2 years is going to remind you that sometimes the door closing in front of you is simply making room for one you haven't even imagined yet. Go ahead and hit subscribe before we continue, because this channel exists for stories exactly like hers. You go home that night to your small apartment on the edge of the financial district, the same apartment you've lived in for 8 years because saving for a house never quite fit into a budget that also included supporting your aging mother and paying off student loans from a graduate degree that was supposed to guarantee you exactly the kind of advancement you keep watching slip away. You sit at your kitchen table with a glass of wine you don't really want, staring at the ceiling, doing the quiet math you've done 4 times now. How many more years can you keep proving yourself to people who've already decided, for reasons that have nothing to do with your competence, that the answer is always going to be no? It's your best friend, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cressida Vantwell, who works in venture capital, who first plants the idea that maybe you're aiming at the wrong door entirely. You're venting to her over dinner 2 weeks after the promotion announcement, describing in exhaustive detail the predictive risk model you built essentially from scratch, the one Kestrel Dunmore now depends on for every major client decision, the one nobody at the firm properly credits because attaching your name to it would mean acknowledging exactly how much of the division's success has quietly rested on your shoulders for years. Why are you still building this for them? Cressida asks, not unkindly, twirling her fork through her pasta with the particular bluntness only a decade of close friendship earns someone. You could build this for yourself. You laugh it off at first, the way you laugh off most suggestions that feel too large and too frightening to take seriously. Building your own firm means walking away from a steady paycheck, means risking the modest financial stability you've clawed together over years of careful saving, means potentially failing spectacularly in front of the exact same industry that's already quietly decided you're not director material. But the idea doesn't leave you. Not that night, not the next week, not through the entire following month as you watch Tobias Renfrew fumble through decisions you could make in your sleep. Decisions you're still unofficially correcting behind the scenes because the division's performance still somehow reflects on you even without the title to show for it. The breaking point comes 4 months later, during a quarterly review meeting where the managing partner, a cold calculating man named Barrington Coswell, presents the predictive risk model to the entire executive board as though it emerged fully, formed from Tobias's leadership, never once mentioning your name, despite the fact that you're sitting right there in the room, technically present as supporting analyst, a title so diminished it barely registers as an acknowledgement at all. You sit through that entire presentation with your hands folded tightly in your lap, watching years of your work get absorbed into someone else's narrative, and something inside you that has been slowly cracking for years finally, quietly, breaks all the way through. You don't cause a scene. You don't say anything at all, actually, which somehow feels worse. Sitting there in professional silence while your own achievement gets narrated back to you by someone who barely understands the underlying mathematics. That night you call Cressida, and this time, instead of laughing off her suggestion, you ask her seriously what it would actually take to build something of your own. The next 18 months are the hardest of your professional life. Harder even than the years of quiet dismissal that preceded them, because at least dismissal came with a paycheck attached. You give notice at Kestrel Dunmore. Watching Barrington, Coswell's face flicker with something between surprise and mild irritation, as though your departure is an inconvenience rather than the direct consequence of years of overlooked contribution. You max out a personal line of credit, cash in a modest retirement fund you'd been building since your 20s, and rent a tiny two-room office space above a dry cleaner in a part of the city that hasn't been fully gentrified yet. The kind of space where the radiator clangs unpredictably and the internet connection drops during heavy rain. You name the company Ashworth Meridian Analytics, and for the first 6 months, it's just you, working 18-hour days rebuilding the predictive risk model from scratch, legally distinct, mathematically superior, incorporating everything you'd learned in the years since you first built the original version. Everything Kestrel Dunmore never bothered to invest in, improving because they never fully understood what they had. You cold call former clients you'd worked with indirectly over the years. People who remembered, even if the executives above you never did, exactly whose analysis had actually kept their portfolios safe during those two market downturns. Your first real client is a modest regional credit union, small enough that Kestrel Dunmore never bothered courting them seriously, but their director, a sharp, skeptical woman named Adeline Fairweather, takes one look at your model's back-tested performance data and signs a contract within a week. It's not a huge account, but it's enough to cover your rent and keep the radiator clanging through another cold winter. And more importantly, it's proof, the first hard evidence you've had in years, that your work, properly credited and properly owned, actually holds up exactly as well as you always suspected it did. Word spreads slowly, the way it does in an industry built on cautious reputations and careful vetting. But it spreads. A second client comes through Adeline's recommendation. A third comes through a former Kestrel Dunmore colleague who'd always quietly recognized your work was being systematically undervalued and finally had the standing, once removed from the firm's internal politics, to say so openly to a contact who mattered. You hire your first employee 8 months in, a brilliant underemployed analyst named Percival Ashgrove who'd been similarly overlooked at a competing firm, someone who understood immediately, without needing lengthy explanation, exactly the kind of culture you were trying to build, one where credit actually followed contribution. Cressida becomes an informal advisor, then eventually helps you navigate your first real funding conversation with a venture capital firm interested in scaling Ashworth Meridian's technology beyond individual client contracts into something more ambitious, a licensable platform that smaller firms across the industry could use to access the kind of predictive modeling only massive institutions like Kestrel Dunmore had previously been able to afford building internally. The pitch meeting terrifies you more than anything you've done in years, standing in front of partners who could fund your vision or dismiss it entirely. But this time, when you present the model, it's your name on every slide, your voice narrating exactly what you built and why it matters, no diminished title standing between your work and the credit it deserves. The funding comes through, 18 months after walking out of Kestrel Dunmore with nothing but a maxed out line of credit and a stubborn refusal to keep building someone else's legacy. Ashworth Meridian Analytics employs 11 people, serves 43 institutional clients, and has just closed a series, a round that values the company at a figure that would have seemed genuinely impossible to you standing in that elevator 2 years earlier, watching your own reflection wonder if the problem had always been you. You learn, almost by accident, scrolling through industry news one evening, that Kestrel Dunmore's own risk division has quietly struggled in your absence. Their models increasingly outdated, several major clients defecting to competitors offering more sophisticated analysis. You can't help but notice with a complicated mixture of vindication and genuine sadness. Remarkably similar in structure to methods you pioneered and were never credited for. The final piece falls into place on a Tuesday morning, 18 months after you'd left, when your assistant informs you that Kestrel Dunmore Financial Group has formally requested a meeting to discuss a potential licensing partnership, wanting access to Ashworth Meridian's predictive modeling technology for their own struggling risk division. You sit with that request for a long moment, feeling something settle in your chest that isn't quite triumph, exactly, but adjacent to it, the particular, hard-won satisfaction of watching an institution finally recognize the value it once dismissed, forced now to negotiate for access to something it once had for free and never bothered to properly value. You take the meeting, professional and measured despite the private, quiet satisfaction humming beneath your composed exterior. And across the conference table sits Barrington Coswell, older now, visibly uncomfortable, along with two board members you don't recognize, and, seated slightly apart from the others, Tobias Renfrew, who has apparently been promoted again in your absence, presumably still riding the momentum of achievements that were never fully his own, looking distinctly smaller in this context than he did the day he thanked you for showing him the ropes. The negotiation takes several weeks, and the terms, when they finally settle, are generous in your favor in ways that would have seemed unimaginable during your years of quiet, uncredited labor at Kestrel Dunmore. You don't gloat. You don't need to. The numbers speak clearly enough on their own, and there's a particular satisfaction in watching Barrington Coswell sign a contract that essentially requires his firm to pay handsomely for continued access to work he once considered so unremarkable. He never bothered attaching your name to it. Ashworth Meridian Analytics goes public 14 months later, on a bright Tuesday morning in early autumn, and you stand on the trading floor surrounded by your small, fiercely loyal team, watching the opening bell ring for a company that exists, fundamentally, because 4 consecutive doors closed in your face and you finally, exhaustedly, stubbornly decided to build your own instead. Cressida stands beside you, tears in her eyes despite her usual sharp composure, and Percival Ashgrove, your first hire, grips your shoulder with a quiet pride that feels more meaningful than any promotion announcement ever could have. You think, standing there watching the stock ticker display your company's name for the first time, about Philippa Ashworth in that elevator 2 years earlier, staring at her own reflection, wondering if the problem had always been her. You want, briefly, fiercely, to reach back through time and tell that exhausted, overlooked version of yourself that the problem was never her competence, was never her contribution. The problem was simply that she was trying to grow inside a structure that had already decided quietly and unfairly exactly how much space it was willing to make for her. Your mother, who worried more than she let on during those uncertain early months of building something from nothing, sits in the audience at the small celebration dinner that evening, beaming in a way you haven't seen since your graduate school commencement, and when she raises her glass to toast you, her voice catches slightly as she tells the assembled team that she always knew, even during the years you doubted yourself, that you were building towards something bigger than any title Kestrel Dunmore was ever going to give you. You still keep tucked in a desk drawer in your new corner office the printout of that final quarterly presentation from Kestrel Dunmore, the one where Barrington Coswell presented your work under Tobias Renfrew's name without once acknowledging you were even in the room. You don't keep it out of bitterness anymore. Not really. You keep it as a reminder of exactly how far quiet, unglamorous persistence can carry someone once they finally stop waiting for permission from people who were never going to give it freely in the first place. Sometimes the promotion you keep getting denied is simply the universe redirecting you toward the company you were always meant to build yourself.